Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first day of the Elyria Hackathon, where we're here creating exciting new data-based innovations to improve the lives and services of the community of Elyria. I'm here representing DataSwift, one of the partners on this, along with Windstream, the sponsor, and Case Western Reserve University. For the first talk on our expert stage, the stage where, of course, we're bringing together a range of speakers from several different fields to contribute their expertise to the event. For this first talk, we have Professor Erman Ayday from Case Western coming to speak to us about privacy and the ethical use of personal data, which is, of course, a topic very dear to our hearts here at DataSwift, and something that you'll see reflected in several other things that we do throughout this two-day hackathon weekend. So without any further ado, Erman, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, James, and thank you for the invite. And before I start, please feel free to jump in whenever you have any questions or if you want to discuss anything. So I don't need to actually finish the presentation all the way to the end. If you want to have some discussions, that's even more beneficial maybe. And the main reason that I'm giving the talk is to maybe motivate further the participants of the hackathon about the use of these distributed systems, actually why we need these distributed systems and how they can actually solve some problems that we are facing today in terms of the privacy and the ethical use of personal data. And the majority of the presentation, just a disclaimer, is going to be showing why the current system doesn't work, so the gaps of the current system, and then at the end I'm just going to try to connect this to some potential solutions and what can be done if the landscape or the ecosystem slightly changes on this front. Anyway, let's start. And my name is Erman Ayday, by the way. I'm a faculty member at Case Western Reserve University, and my main research topic is data privacy. All right, so I thought maybe we should first start with the definition of privacy, because this is something that sometimes there are some confusions. So what's privacy? Because to many people, privacy is equivalent to hiding something. So you have your personal data. Hiding your personal data from other parties is sometimes defined as privacy, which is, at least to me and to many other people working on this domain, is not actually the correct definition. So privacy is not really hiding things. Instead, we can actually define privacy as having control on your personal data. So you have your personal data. Obviously, you would like to share it with other parties. These other parties can be governments, can be companies, you name it. And you don't want to hide your data completely. You just want to have control over your data. What does this control mean? Control means you would like to know, for example, some consequences of this data sharing. You would like to know how the other party is going to store your data, maybe under encryption or not, how the other party is planning to process your data, how are you going to get benefit out of this data sharing, will you be able to get out of the system whenever you want, this right to be forgotten. So all these things actually can be included in this control. And we have some mechanisms, we have some technologies that enable us this control today, which are briefly called privacy enhancing technologies. And the main goal of these systems or the tech is let the personal data used only in the context that it has been released. But the bad news is, as you will see in the coming slides, it's getting more and more difficult for these technologies to catch up. And the reason is the existence of these massive data lakes, these centralized data storage centers. Since we said personal data, let me also maybe give a definition of personal data. What do I mean by personal data? So personal data is not only your social security number or your name or your telephone number. It used to be, actually, when the internet was not that widely available. But these days, even your hospital records can be your personal data. Even your location patterns can be your personal data. Financial records, even in an anonymized way, it can be personal data. And this makes things a little bit more challenging. And the reason that I call all these things personal data is we are now living in an interconnected world, and there are many data sets, publicly available data sets out there. And based on some statistics, a grown-ups in the US, a grown-ups data exists in more than 600 different publicly available data sets. For example, one data set includes your voter registration information, which obviously includes your name, your gender, your date of birth, your address, and everything, a lot of sensitive information. And another data set maybe a hospital discharge record, supposed to be an anonymized data set, includes your diagnosis, but also still includes your gender, date of birth, your at least zip code. And also at the same time, it's HIPAA compliant. And now you can probably understand the problem. These data sets can be intersected, or aggregated. When they are intersected, then I can map, or I can match, or I can link your voter registration data into your hospital discharge data and link your name or an identity to your symptom, which is pretty bad. And it happened before, and it's happening more and more today, these types of linkage attacks. So that's why I wanted to keep the definition of personal data a little bit more general. So who are the players in this system, in this privacy game, let's say? In other words, who are we concerned about when we consider our privacy? So these are mainly the governments, different companies, organizations that we work for, our colleagues, family and friends, and strangers. So I don't want to keep this part long, but today I just want to mainly focus on the companies, because those are the ones with whom we share most of our data with, right? And when I say companies, these can be your bank, social network that you are subscribed to, your location-based service provider, I don't know, your GPS service provider, anything. Any one of these are under the category of companies. Now the question comes, why do these companies want our data? Well, the reason is obvious, right? They want to improve their applications. That's the first reason. If you want to be a little bit naive, that's the first reason. They want to improve their algorithms. They want to provide more personalized services to you. Sorry, that's why they want your data. But the other thing, on the other side, and there's a second reason, which is maybe even stronger than the first reason. Most of these companies make money out of your data. How do they make money? Because, I mean, you can say that the subscription is free. So, I mean, they are not actually making money out of me, but it's not the case actually. You know, there's this well-known phrase, if you are not paying for it, you are the part of the product. So, and here on the right side, maybe it's a little bit small, but you can see this chart. This is the Facebook's revenue breakdown in 2020. And here there's a small number, it says 98%. So the 98% of this revenue is coming from advertising. And the advertising means that, you know, advertisers actually paying Facebook in order to show their ads to the users. How do they show their ads to the users? In an accurate way. In other words, if you are a company, if you are an advertiser, you want to show your ad to the user who is a potentially buyer, right? You don't want to show it to everyone because you are paying for it. You are paying to show your advertisement. And how do you understand if somebody is a potential buyer? You get to know that person. How do you get to know that person? You get to collect the data, the personal information belonging to that person. And that's provided by Facebook to these companies. And I'm not saying, by the way, Facebook is the bad party here. It's just an example. I mean, you will hear these names a couple of times, Facebook, Google, because they are good examples of today's landscape. And what's the main problem here? Again, I will keep saying the same problem again over the next slides as well, the central data collection, because Facebook has access to all this mass amount of personal information. It can actually supply this personal information to these advertisers. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, some of us actually would like to see some relevant advertisements when we are browsing our Facebook profiles, right? Because maybe we are planning to buy something and it's okay. Maybe we are seeing a relevant advertisement, makes it easier for us. But most of us don't want to do that. At least most of us don't want our data to be known by those advertisers, because this is really personal information. And how, I mean, they want our data. We understood that. How do they get our data? And there are two ways. And this is obvious, actually. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but you know, one way the companies collect our data is they indirectly do this. In other words, when we are using an application on the background, they can indirectly collect our data. For example, when you are using Google Maps, your location information obviously goes to Google. And there are a lot of different apps that wants to have access to your location information as you are using the app, probably, right? I mean, this is one way of indirect collection. But most of the data, surprisingly, is collected voluntarily. In other words, people actually share their data voluntarily with these companies. And the problem is most of these people do this without any solid conscience. In other words, they don't really realize that this data is going to sit in the big data lake of that company forever. I mean, they just think that maybe the data is going to sit on their Facebook wall, and then when they want to delete it, it's going to be deleted. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So this data goes to the companies. Okay, but then, but how much companies know about us, right? That's another question. And again, I'm going to show you one example about that. And this is a very nice example, very nice figure, actually. This figure is provided by a journalist from Wall Street Journal. And this was, I guess, 5-6 years ago. You can assume that this figure can be even more enhanced these days. And this is just briefly showing what Google knows about us, right? And when I say Google, maybe I should say Alphabet because it's more general. You can think about their search service. You can think that YouTube is owned by Google. They have their picture sharing domain that you can actually share your pictures. So obviously that information is known by Google. Most importantly, they have Gmail, so all your emails, and they have Google Docs. So all your documents that you are maybe jointly editing is known by Google. And needless to say, your Google search history, your YouTube history, and everything. So all these are actually different data sets, but all these belong to the same company. So this is pretty scary, actually. And having this information and processing this information, most of the companies can actually create a very good profile about you. And they can actually learn even things that you don't even know about yourself, which is even more scary. And this fact is not limited to social networks. I gave you a couple of examples about Facebook, Google, but this is not only limited to social networks. There are other modern observation tools that actually allow companies or governments, or let's say third parties, to collect our data. Our cellular phone information is collected by the by the carriers, and it's also stored in these big data lakes. Our web browsing, as we just discussed, our activities on online social networks, as I just told you. Now, a lot of information about our biometrics is also collected. A lot of companies actually using biometric authentication, but in order to use that biometric authentication, actually they collect our biometric data. And now that high throughput genomic sequencing is very cheap, actually, a lot of service providers started to provide direct-to-consumer genomic services, which they get our genomic data and they provide us some services, pretty cool services. But in order to provide those services, they actually get our genomic data and they store our genomic data. I can probably give another, like a 1-hour presentation about the privacy consequences, implications of genomic data. I'm not going to do it now, but it's pretty scary. At the end of the presentation, I'm just going to maybe recommend you a movie to watch, and that will give you all the ideas about that. So what happens to all this data after it's collected? So the data is collected, I told you, it's collected by the companies. What happens to the data? The data goes to the cloud because the companies typically keep all this data in the cloud. But then another question comes. So who is this cloud, right? Who owns the cloud? Who can access to this cloud? Or where is this cloud located physically anyway? Or where are these storage services? In which country? Or which legislation is used in order to access to the data inside these clouds, based on where it's located or based on whose information is it. So these are all like gray areas, actually, that's still under investigation, still under question. People are questioning these types of things. And again, as I told you a couple of slides ago, I'm not saying that all the companies are bad companies. I mean, some of the companies collect this data, maybe they don't share it with the advertisers, maybe they only use this data for your own benefits, which is the ideal case, right? Then maybe we don't have any privacy concerns. But unfortunately, that's also not correct, because once this huge amount of data is stored in a big data lake, then there is always this risk of having data breaches. So my numbers on this slide are a little bit outdated, but you can consider these numbers much more increased over the past few years. Data breaches is a huge problem for these big data lakes. So the hackers going into these databases, getting all these data sets, including all this personal information, and sharing this personal information, or maybe selling this personal information in other platforms. And recently, over the last few weeks, I've seen a lot of examples about these things. I guess Facebook had a very recent data breach. A lot of healthcare services, hospitals are having a lot of data breaches every day. And there is a website designated for actual healthcare data breaches, which is also pretty scary. But this is the main threat. So just to sum up about the challenges for privacy today, is the existence of these big databases, right? I mean, the fact that the data is collected by these big databases and stored there. Everybody's data is in the same data set or database. And there is this risk of data aggregation, right? Different databases can be intersected, and once they are intersected, they become more powerful. In other words, they get to know more and more about us. And also the emergence of these social networks do not really help us, because I mean, the social networks, people actually share a lot of things, maybe without having the intention to do those sharings. And some of the people actually later delete those things, but deleting something from social networks doesn't mean that actually the social network operator or the internet at large forgets about that information. Another big challenge, so these are the challenges for privacy, general challenges. Another side challenge, again, because of the existence of big databases, is surveillance, right? Now that all this data is stored in these big databases, and now data aggregation is even possible, this mass surveillance is now actually a reality, because like 10 years ago, maybe we didn't have enough storage to store everyone's data. And again, 10 years ago, maybe we didn't have enough computation power to do the analysis on this collected data. But today, actually, we do have that computation power, and the storage is extremely cheap. Let me show you a couple of numbers. For example, it takes only 100 megabytes to record everything, the fastest typist input to his computer in a year. Everything you type on your computer for the entire year, only 100 megabytes. And you know, 100 megabytes is actually just one email, right? And it only takes 700 gigabytes to constantly record all video of an individual per year. It's like a live recorder, 365 days. I record all your activities 24/7, and it's only 700 gigabytes. Of course, not 4K video, but good enough to understand what you are doing. And again, even 700 gigabytes, not that expensive. It can be actually stored somewhere, and then, you know, anybody can use it whenever they need it. So that's why the storage is now cheap. The processing is much more powerful. So that's why this surveillance is getting more and more problematic for citizens. Okay, so up to now, we discussed a lot of things about the problems, today's problems. And again, just to remind you, the reason of the problem, at least to me, this is my point of view, is the existence of these big databases and the fact that we have to do this data aggregation. So what about the solutions? I mean, do we still have solutions? As I told you, there are these privacy enhancing technologies. Yes, we can use technology to solve some of these problems. But a better solution is no centralized data collection, right? What if we provide the data to the users? I mean, what if we let the users keep their own data? In other words, have full control over their data, which is only possible if we come back to a distributed setting from a centralized one. So currently, Google, Facebook, they collect all your data, they store all your data, and then as soon as we provide our data to these service providers, we lose the total control of our data. But what if we keep our data, right? We don't share our data with these service providers. Then I guess you may have one obvious question. Then how do I get service from these service providers? If they don't get my data, they don't provide services back to me, which is also not correct, because today we can actually process this data in a distributed setting, get the same service. Many of you maybe heard the name federated learning, right? I mean, these service providers can still build personalized models even without seeing your data. You keep your own data. You never share it completely with the service provider or the online social network, but still the social network can provide you personalized services. It can still develop these models. So it is today possible. So this is why I'm kind of advocating this type of a solution, more distributed setting rather than centralized data solution. And this idea is very much in line with the concept of privacy by design. So this is a very old concept, actually, maybe 15, 20 years old concept. And the idea is to facilitate the internet economy so that the consumers can trust the services they use online. So today we are missing that. So people are not really trusting the services they are using online. So there is always this skeptical way of thinking. I mean, what if my data is going to be stolen? What if my data is going to be shared by the government, shared with the government by this company, and so on, which happened before. As you know, the Prism actually told us how this data was being shared with the governments. So the privacy by design is a concept that advocating this. And moving into this distributed setting is a great way towards privacy by design. And another good news is not only privacy, but the ethical data analysis becomes much more easier with this distributed setting. So what are the key requirements of ethical data analysis today? This is a short list, you can make it longer, but data ownership, right? Which is the thing that I've been talking about from the beginning. Letting people control their own data, not hide their data, but share their data by having control over it, knowing that how their data is going to be preserved, how their data is going to be reshared, and whenever they want, they should be able to have an option to get out of the system as soon as they want to do it. Verification of the data source. So you receive data from people, and this is a huge problem today on the internet. On Twitter, there are lots of fake accounts trying to distribute fake news, right? How do I verify the source? How do I verify the data coming from a particular data source? One concern today is if I try to verify the data source, then I'm invading privacy, right? But actually, you can do this type of verification much easier if you keep the data in a distributed setting, which makes it much easier on that front. The other one is transparency or informed consent. Whenever you are collecting data from people, if you give them the full control over data, then you have more transparency. Data minimization, which is very much advocated by GDPR today in EU, right? I mean, when you are collecting data from people, you only collect data that you can justify why you are collecting that data for. You don't collect more data than you need. So that's another thing, which can be also very easily actually achieved in a distributed environment. Other ones called reproducibility. When you build a model using the data, how can you actually reproduce the results so that other scientists, other researchers can actually follow your research? Fairness, when you build a model out of the collected data, make sure that the model is not going to be biased for a particular population. It's going to, encompass the entire population, or it's going to be also useful for the minorities. So today it's hard to achieve this because today people cannot, at least the researchers cannot collect that much fine-grained data in order to build fair models. But if they don't need to collect the data, if the models can be actually developed in a distributed way, then it is easier to provide fairness along with privacy, right? And as I told you, it's much easier to meet these requirements without these centralized layers if we move more into this distributed architecture. And just to conclude, I guess I'm almost running out of time. As I told you over the last few slides, personal information is getting massively digitized. And as a result, the privacy of individuals is in a big risk today. And therefore, it is really crucial to change the way personal data is collected and processed. And over the next 2 days, today and tomorrow, I guess the technology that the participants are going to use, this PDA technology by DataSwift, is a way towards it, because it actually it lets you distribute the things. It lets you give the control of the data to the actual owner of the data. So before I finish, I just wanted to include a couple of movies here, which actually is great inspiration. If you are into privacy and ethical use of data, I would strongly recommend watching these movies. And this was the one I told you during the presentation about this genomics and the privacy consequences of genomic data. And thank you again. So these are my contact informations, my email, my lab's webpage, if you have any interest on the works, privacy related works that we are doing. And thank you again. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you very much for that, Erman. That was a really interesting listen. It strikes me if we're in the business of recommending films on the use and misuse of data, that without giving too much away, I would recommend to anyone listening the latest James Bond, as this is a very interesting plot point. Well, I won't I won't ruin it for you, Erman.
Oh yeah, thanks.
No one likes the guy who gives out spoilers, but I'll leave it there. I'll leave it to your judgment.
Thank you.
So you gave a list of aspects of ethical data use. Yeah. What would you say is the kind of the lowest hanging fruit? What are what's the easiest stuff that people who are considering developing applications could try and have?
Well, I guess data ownership and data minimization is the easiest low-hanging fruits, because when you switch to when you transform these centralized data lakes into a more distributed environment, data ownership and data minimization is a byproduct of this transformation anyway. So you are letting people control over their data. Then obviously there will be some people saying that here is all my data, you can use it however you wish, like an open consent. Of course, there will be these types of people, but can we consider this as a privacy breach? Probably not, because they are providing their data to the service providers with their own consent, right? As long as they know that they are signing the consent for the broad usage of their data, then that's fine. Well, except for some interdependent privacy problem, because their data that they are actually providing may breach the privacy of some other people, which is a very interesting different topic. For, I mean, very naively, if you are tagging me on your Facebook photo without my consent, you shouldn't be doing that, right? I mean, that is something like that. But yeah, those two are the most easy to achieve, I guess, data ownership and data minimization, at least up to some level.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that point around the points you're making earlier, connecting to the data ownership point around just in how many places, how many hundreds of places your data could be around the internet. I think you had something like 700 places for a reasonably economic.
600-700 different databases, exactly. 600-700 different databases. It's huge.
It's crazy, and just the sheer amount that is stored. I think obviously we both work in this space, but I'm always endlessly surprised
the scary thing is different states here in the US, different states have very interesting, the way of working. If you type my name on Google, I'm not asking you to do it, but you can even see where I'm living. Because in Ohio, if you own a house, that's public information. So you can actually find my house, which is scary, right? I mean, if you know who is living where by just typing the name on Google, it's a pretty sensitive information, my exact address. So, but it's how it works in Ohio. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot more we could say on those topics, but sadly we're out of time.
Yeah.
As ever, I could quite happily be in a conversation with you for another 2 hours on this, but sadly we only have 1 minute. But thank you very much for your contribution. Really interesting primer for everyone who's attending this particular weekend. We'll be distributing this out on the general channel, and I look forward to seeing how this influences people's designs over the next little while.